Hello and welcome back to the Argyle Financial Controller Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which includes complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of this session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speakers, Matt McManus, Group Head of Finance at Kainos, and Brock Vaughters, Head of Operations Americas at Kainos. We're excited to have Matt and Brock with us for a thought leadership titled Practical Planning, Improve Forecasting and Modeling for Better Decision-Making. Welcome, Matt and Brock, and over to you.
Thanks, Brittany, and welcome everybody, and we certainly appreciate you joining us today. We'll start with a quick introduction from both Brock and myself on our own careers, what we do today, and also I'll give you a bit of a heads up about what Kainos does as a business. And then we'll maybe take 3 or 4 topics really to talk about how better to improve forecasting and modeling for better decision making. We'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, so we'd encourage you to submit questions, and we'll definitely set aside some time to go through those, so that'll keep it interactive and fun, hopefully, as well. So with that, I'll start by introducing myself. So as Brittany said, I'm the Group Head of Finance at Kainos. I've been at Kainos for close to 7 years now. So prior to joining Kainos, I started my working career as an accountant with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Belfast in Northern Ireland in the grad scheme. And I stayed there for about 7 years, had some audit experience, some business recoveries experience, and spent some time on secondment at a local bank as well. After leaving PwC, I spent 2 short stints in corporate accounting roles in both Citibank and in Chicago Mercantile Exchange, both setting up finance functions again in Belfast, so not straying too far from home. And then in 2016, I joined Kainos. I joined initially as a finance manager, and I've progressed through to the Group Head of Finance, where I've been performing that role for the last over 3 years. So today I lead the entire finance function, so that covers tax, treasury, payroll, everything else, you name it. And I report directly to the CFO and support him with all the analysts and shareholders meetings, as we are a listed FTSE 250 company. So we're headquartered in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and today we have almost 3,000 colleagues. In terms of what we do then, so with 3 main lines of business. So our largest is our digital service business, which provides digital transformation, cloud, AI services to public and commercial organizations, predominantly in the UK, but with a growing presence in Europe and in North America. Secondly, we're very proud to be a Workday services partner and have been for over 10 years, and we've now over 1,000 Workday experts spanning 20 countries. And our most recent line of business is our Workday products business. So we have developed our own internal product suite of automated testing, compliance, and data privacy tools exclusively for the Workday platform. And we're also pretty well known for our exciting Workday Extend solutions. So that's an overview of Kainos and me. It's over to Brock now, my other esteemed presenter.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Again, Brock Vaughters, Head of Operations here for Americas. As Matt alluded to, I work on the Workday side of our business here in Americas. So we have locations support the region from Canada to the US down to Argentina, and so we've got a pretty good footprint on this side of the world. I obviously don't have an accent like Matt does, and so joining you here from Indianapolis, Indiana. Prior to joining Kainos, I've been here about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I was the CFO for a small university here in Indiana, and then Prior to that, did a number of different things from governmental accounting to distribution, online technology firms. So a bunch of different industry experiences that kind of bring to bear here. My oversight is really for everything that goes on in Americas for the Workday practice. And so that I get to work with Matt pretty closely on the financial side, budgeting, forecasting, modeling, but also get involved in sales and targets and revenue and issues of legal, things like that. So all of these things kind of come to bear to the conversation today about modeling and some of the pitfalls that we have is just on the operational side of the business and what we might run into. So, but with that, look forward to the conversation today for sure.
You have a pretty lengthy job description, Brock, if you were to write it down, would you?
Yeah, it's a couple of pages
Problem
for sure.
solver.
I often joke I'm required to know all things at all times. So yeah, that's it.
Well, that'll come in handy for the Q&A at the end. So listen, we thought so we've two different types of experience within company and two different perspectives. So I'm very much from the central finance function, looking at the governance of planning, budget, modeling. Whereas Brock is more in the applying it within the business or within a particular area of the business. So hopefully with those two different perspectives, we'll give you a bit of a feel for how we see modeling within Kainos. So if we maybe start, overall, to set a bit of context, the last few years, I'm sure for everyone on the call, have been pretty intense and pretty dynamic. So when that comes to modeling and forecasting and budgeting, that's been the most intense period of my life anyway, in my roles. So I can remember thinking back to early 2020 and it was just after I took on the current role, and we actually launched our Workday Adaptive Planning tool at that point. We implemented ourselves as a customer, and then about 3 weeks later, I remember sending the whole team home for the first COVID lockdown. So before COVID, as Kainos would have done quarterly forecasting as a group and annual budgeting, and then instantly you're into daily forecasting, but in a much more acute cash flow needs point of view. And then gradually, as the weeks went by, Kainos was very fortunate in the sense of the businesses and the markets we dealt with we were still able to continue and in fact grow quite significantly. So it went from immediate cash flow forecasting into growth mode and sensitivity scenario planning all around that. So it was a pretty tumultuous sort of 6 months, and it's settled down quite a bit since then, thankfully, for everybody. And from a planning point of view, we're back into the sort of quarterly forecasting cycles with the annual budgets again. So it's an interesting period of time of just how the needs of an FP&A team or a finance team or an entire business actually to model can change just from unexpected circumstances. So Brock, I know you joined Kainos September 21, so you might have missed, or you did miss the vast majority of that turbulent time. But maybe how do you see planning in Kainos compared to maybe your previous roles?
Yeah, so I think going back to what Matt was saying, just around the timing of it, was at a university when, again, sending students home, locking things down. What does that mean? How do we do this, right? We had a budget for the year, we had plans, and then you introduce all kinds of involvement around PPP loans and the like, right? How do you manage, how do you budget for those things? Or how does that then impact the forecast going forward? How do you model that, moving forward if it goes away? And when things don't return to normal, right? There's a new normal that exists after that. So whether that's travel has changed now, right? We're doing a virtual conference. This may have been done in person 2-3 years ago. What does that mean? So I think that's really it. There's 3 or 4 different levels of change that we would imagine to happen, right? We've got this macro event, we've got industry kind of changes that would happen, and then company specific things that are going on, whether that's new technology that's been implemented. Matt was alluding to, again, when you go to a daily forecasting or how we're doing on you don't have a system built for that, right? So how do you kind of overcome those challenges and keeping up with the pace of change? The reality is that you simply adapt, right? Like it is a function of what's the new normal. And for us coming into Kainos, at least understanding, the different processes that exist around really just building out the drivers of the business really didn't change. I think that's kind of the thing. So I'm always looking for what's going to stay steady in the storm, regardless of what's going on around us. And I think that's one of our keys that we'll talk about here too, is just understanding those key drivers. They can change, but they fundamentally shouldn't change throughout the course of a long stretch of time. Disruption in the industry, that could change things, macro environment, inflation, all the things we can't control, those can influence it, but fundamentally the drivers of the business should be pretty steady. And so that's, yes, change is the new normal, 100%, but always going back to what are the drivers of the business and how do we make sure we're keeping track and modeling those things well. So.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Focus on the core business always. So this topic really is around avoiding the most common planning pitfalls, really. And if I cover the first two on the list, really. So automation has been a big focus for us within Kainos, and particularly within my team. So as I alluded to earlier about implementing Workday Adaptive Planning. Prior to that, I'm sure a lot of people in this call would have been using Excel-based modeling, and as much as an accountant like myself loves Excel, it's just not it's not as robust as maybe a solution like Workday Adaptive Planning will be. So, to give an example, as we are predominantly a services-based business, about 90% of our business is services-based. So, the biggest cost we have as a company is our staff costs, and right now we are able to press a button and we have an instant upload of our existing real-time staff profile within our planning module. So that's given us sort of 75% 100% accuracy on staff cost, on our total costs, if that makes sense, if I haven't confused everybody. So that's a really stable foundation, knowing that all the modeling we're going to do is based on accurate, real-time, up-to-date data, and just simple things like that. Now that we do it, now that we've been doing stuff like that for 3 years within adaptive planning, you almost forget the risks and the pain that was associated with the sort of manual downloading files, reformatting, uploading, version 50, these sort of things. That kind of disappears, and you really are focusing on the value add activity. So automation is a really important part of our remit in Kainos and the finance team. And then simplification. So we have been using Workday's financial suite since 2017. And I remember I led the implementation for Kainos, and I remember the consultants coming into the room and saying that, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this. And you're kind of like a kid in a sweet shop, yeah, we'll add this field, then we'll add that field, yeah. And very quickly you realize a good consultant will tell you that only start tracking data if you're going to use it, if it's going to add value to the business. And a bit like what Brock said at the start there, if you're focusing on your core business, the peripheral stuff, you should be really honest in terms of, if you're going to track it, you're going to maintain it, are you actually going to use it? And when it comes to planning and modeling, that's so critical. If you're able to do a model and you've built so much noise into it and you can't extract the key meaningful piece of information, then it's really not worth doing whatsoever. So there's two things we've learned. We weren't perfect at the start, I'll be honest on that one, but we've learned over time to get much better at it. Brock, you mentioned historical data, yeah.
Yeah, when I came to Kainos, all the things that Matt just mentioned, like didn't exist in my my previous role. It was Google Sheets. It was, oh goodness, who's deleted this, or who has access and doesn't have access, and trying to get 50 different departments to all submit it at the same time, and just absolutely, you can't do it. One of the other sessions, somebody said it. We don't want to remove the human element. We want to remove the human error. right? And so there's a good bit of human knowledge that AI can't replicate there. Hopefully I'm not sparking any discussions there, but nonetheless, like we want to be able to provide, like we want to spend our time thinking about those things. So automation, simplifying as best we can for sure. And then the point I like to make just on the historical data, again, going back to the idea of like there's things that happen. If you're looking at your trends, hey, what did we do last year in this area? What do we do? We want to model out this cost or this expense or this kind of revenue stream or source of sales, might whatever the category is. You really have to understand what is the context that's happening in the past and making sure the data is reflective. And so is that going to happen in the future? The likelihood of hopefully a COVID or a PPP loan impacting, hopefully that won't happen again, right? So how do we adjust? How do we look at our data to make sure it does align with our future expectations, right? So that's really the key, is to make sure that the context around the data is really analyzed and understood. And is that a one-off event? Can I really determine seasonality of my industry, because I've got these things, these outliers need to be taken care of. So looking to make sure the data is correct and accurate, and then obviously really applying that user intuition, that institutional knowledge that you might have about the likelihood of events reoccurring. So I think that's really going to be some of the pitfalls that we've stepped through in the past of not planning for or expecting those one-offs to happen again when in reality they may not. So
the historical data one is quite interesting, actually, because we pretty much every year since I've been here, we've done an annual reorg in some shape or form, or we've created a new division, or we've consolidated divisions. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Workday Finances. I've been using it for so long that one of the big things about historical data is that we're able to port our historical data. So if we decide to consolidate it, we still have the trend. Or if we try to deconsolidate certain business units, you still have the trend. So back to what you're saying, Brock, I think it's really important that if you can, that you have a model or a modeling tool or platform that allows that historical information. Because if we're talking about changes in your normal, you can't be starting from scratch every time you have to change. So do you mind jumping to the next slide then, please? That's us. Sorry, you're there already. Beat me to it. So this really is, the topic is around improving forecasting with agreed priorities and focus areas. So to me, this is all about value creation, right? So if I look at value creation through, say, three lenses, you've got agility. You've got to react to what the business needs quickly. You've then got efficiencies. So how can you drive cost out of the business? And you've reporting. So how can you provide insights quickly to the business? So in practical terms, like that's all well and good, but how do you apply that? So understanding your business drivers and stick stubbornly to them. Okay. So as a services business, it's quite simple. We're growing year on year, 10 consecutive years of growth, growing in different areas, different countries, trying different routes to market. But at the core heart of it, each model and each associated report that's driven from that model, they're no use unless they show the very basic fundamental 5 or 6 key pieces of information. So, headcount, sell rates, utilization, and maybe 1 or 2 things on top of that. So you can get lost in the noise of the change or the new ideas. And if you don't focus back on the core business, as Brock mentioned earlier, and your model is not very, very apparently showing those core pieces of information, then I don't think it's worth the effort of doing it. So that's one of the things we've learned over time, that you want to invest in new things and new ideas, and then you find it very hard to step back, into the 30,000-foot view and actually what is it telling us as a business, and you end up spending more time on a very small part of the business, whereas you should spend more time on the bigger parts that can drive the most value. The other thing I'd say is around scenario planning. So I think that's been a real game changer for us in Kainos. So in the old ways of modeling and Excel, creating a new scenario just had lots of inherent risk about data integrity and whatnot. So now with an adaptive, we're able to just pretty much hit file, save as, and change a key assumption, and you know, if it's FX or growth rates or utilization or whatever it may be, and you have a new scenario. So I think that to me is where we're adding real value to the business. You know, what if, and you're able to quantify the what if to the business.
Yeah. What really sticks out to me is just the cohesiveness of everybody being on the same page, right? We're all on the same sheet of music. We're all, yes, let's look at this scenario right now in real time. As you might imagine, a global organization like yourselves got some time zone differences here. And so having different scenarios being run and being able to quickly come back in when someone did it in the morning, I can pick it up in the afternoon, and just having one system to really be together on is really key to effectively using those different scenarios. I'm going to reiterate what Matt said. These identifying these key drivers and being just stubborn's a good word. I was going to use something just immovable on what they are and how important they are to the business is just vital. And it's not everything. It's not 10 to 12, right? That's not the reality. It's got to be, just a handful of things that these are the key drivers. There's always degrees from it. Yes, this is a derivative of that, and here, okay, but boil it down. What are those 3, 4, 5, 6 things that this is what moves the needle in the organization? This is what comes to profitability. This is what the organization really needs to focus on in order, as Matt said, drive out those costs, right? How do we do that? Well, here are the areas of those drivers. And the last point here is just to validate the model. There's typically top down, bottom up. There's all kinds of different ways, but you want to be able to make sure that when I've built this model, we're standing these things up, I think I've identified the key drivers, or we're tweaking this here. Is there a way to validate that? Is there a way to ensure that what we think is going to happen is actually moving? And they're all connected, right? Every business is connected. It's people, it's product, it's services, it's supply chains, it's upstream, down, all of it, right? So we know that moving one here will have an impact down the line. And so it's really just about validating that model. Is there multiple ways that we can look at to say, yeah, does this make sense? And then again, now we're going into scenario planning, or how sensitive is my model to a couple of movements here or there, right? So I know exactly the start of the year, like if sales are off or headcount is wrong, I've got a couple of points here, but after that, it's very sensitive to these movements. And so we're managing those, we're training our team on those, we're making sure that everybody's on the same page about how critical these key drivers of the business are. So, yeah.
Cool. Can you move to the last slide, I think? So the third and final one, in terms of how to educate the business to build confidence and support efficiency. So a couple of really important topics here. So when I think of how we rolled out the implementation of adaptive planning in Kainos, we were very keen that planning and modeling was seen as not a central finance task. It was something that the business would own and stand over themselves. That requires a lot of change. So you're going from people just saying, finance have told me this is my budget next year, to this is my budget next year, and I know why I'm going to hit it or beat it or miss it. So how do we do that? Firstly, you obviously have a good tool, a good product to use, and that goes without saying. But in terms of bringing people along the journey, the first thing we found was showing them what they're going to get out of it. So quick wins, as in showing them the reports that are going to be available and the insight they're going to get. And once they have that carrot, then we found the actual engagement increased dramatically. So start with the reports. Don't start with a model. Start with the reports. Ask the users what would they need to drive the business. And that's where I've often seen, I get involved in quite a lot of our customer implementations. That's where I see some customers feeling where they're feeling to add value, where they focus more on the plumbing or the ledgers and all, and they don't focus on the actual, what are they going to use it for? So that's a big part of it. So getting people on board early with user-focused reporting, and then the training itself becomes relatively straightforward, because once they know the end game, they're much more bought into the thought process and how they need to get there. So it has been transformational for us as a business, where finance are really the sort of police, the administrators, the challenge function, supporting people with improving the process. But the actual day-to-day stuff that Brock himself will do, for instance, for our North American practice, there's very little requirement from finance to interact in that.
Yeah. I'll just
I'm
add on
just
the
conscious.
oh, we
Sorry.
okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Brock. I'm just
Yeah,
conscious
no,
of
just
time.
gonna,
We'll have to leave a few minutes for Q&A if there is any.
we sure do. Trying to not to hide from the questions for sure, but just on the training bit, like we found at least here that pushing this down to the lowest possible level that we can. So it's not just the directors, the executives making decisions here locally. Like we want the entire team to understand exactly how this works and how the business is run, and really understand what are the drivers. And so we'll take the time and trying to push that information and understanding to the lowest level, and that impacts the decisions, that impacts behaviors that people are doing on a daily basis, that again help drive the results that we're looking for. So definitely meaningful reports, not used by everyone, but everyone understands what are the drivers of the business, right? So yeah, that's it. Q&A.
Brittany, I don't know if there aren't any questions. I do have another topic to discuss, but why don't we go to the Q&A box?
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for such an insightful discussion. We did have quite a few questions come through. And as a reminder to the audience, you can still enter your questions. This first question, what are the best ways to hold the business accountable for budget, actual and forecast results?
What are the best ways to hold the business accountable? Oh, there's a tricky one. I think it depends what your culture is as a business. So you could be the big bad finance function and say you miss your targets, your merit or your compensation package is linked to it, whether it's bonus or actual pay. Or you could be a slightly more I don't know what the word is without sounding provocative, but slightly more liberal organization where the bonus and planning function is meant to be incentivizing but not rigid, and driving performance and driving behaviors, but not as much of a stick, because it is a fine line. Because if you go too heavy-handed, then I've seen, not in Kainos thankfully, but I've seen people make decisions that are best for their own needs in terms of hitting their targets, but worse for the company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tricky one. I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think it's case by case for the organization you work for. I know in Kainos we have part of senior management's compensation will be linked to performance, but not all by any means. So it's a bit of both, really.
I'll just add very quickly because I know we get more questions, but always try to balance the responsibility and authority, right? And so I always shy away from, if someone has the responsibility for it but no authority to make decisions, there's a recipe for disaster. So we really want to make sure that we've aligned their incentives, their goals, right? That we've given them both the authority and responsibility to make decisions and really own it. I've always thought it's very clear, like, hey, we need X top line and this at the bottom line. Go out and figure out how to do it. Right, is really the way to make sure that they own what are those forecasts, how are we doing, what are those decisions being made, right? So yeah.
Great, well, thank you both. This next question, how do you convey the importance of timely and accurate data in order to get good forecasting?
That one's easy. When you don't have timely and accurate data, the forecasting is awful. So I think if you go to the Kainos example, when we rolled out the adaptive planning module, the reports were available from day one, and some parts of the business, the reports showed like nonsensical information, and we were very assured from a central point of view to say, well, guys, that's because you haven't put the right information in the first place, and they then say, okay, I can see the format of the reports, I can see what it could look like, but I need to be the one responsible for inputting the data or owning the data, as the case may be. So I think it sounds more difficult than what it is, but if you're bringing people along that journey, I think they see the carrot, like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
They see that if they control their data, govern their data at source, then the planning and forecasting and reports become really, really important.
Agreed. That's exactly how we do it here. We just again, having ownership of it, want to make sure that it all comes together at the right time, right? We are a part of a bigger team, and so need to understand that we've got a role to play and need to deliver on time, bottom line. So
Excellent. Thank you. It looks like we have time to squeeze in one last question. This last question asks, what recommendations can you make for organizations struggling to develop a successful planning or forecasting framework?
I'll lead off. It all comes
Hmm.
down from the top. Like you've got to have a team that's bought in to say, we need this in order to grow our organization. We need this in order to organize our resources and making sure that we are spending money where we can get the best return. And so if it's not there, if the leadership team is not buying in, you're going to have a hard time, and it's going to be a problem throughout.
Yeah, great. I mean, what is the purpose of doing it in the first place? I see loads of companies saying, yeah, I'm doing a budget, and it's done once. You never look at it again until the next year, and the anniversary comes around. So what's the point in doing it in the first place? If you're mature enough as a business and critical enough, self-critical enough, then you should be able to see the value of doing it, and therefore then it kind of makes sense. But I agree with what Brock said.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that is all the time we have, but thank you both again, Brock and Matt, for such an insightful session. I also want to thank everyone who joined us for this incredible thought leadership. This session, along with all today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Matt and Brock.